The unbreakable civilization, how Iran turned defeat into an art form. Throughout recorded history, there is perhaps no greater paradox than this. The civilizations that conquered Iran were, more often than not, ultimately conquered by it. Alexander the Great swept in from Macedonia with unstoppable phalanxes. Roman legions marched east with the full confidence of an empire that had never truly lost. Arab armies rode in on the momentum of a revolutionary new faith. And the Mongols, the most terrifying military machine the medieval world had ever seen, arrived leaving nothing behind but pyramids of skulls. Any one of these blows would have been enough to erase most civilizations from the map permanently. The Babylonians vanished, the Hittites dissolved, the Assyrians became a footnote. But Iran endured, not merely by surviving, but by doing something far more remarkable: it absorbed its conquerors. Within a generation or two, the invaders began speaking Persian, dressing in Persian garments, building in Persian architectural styles, and governing through Persian bureaucratic frameworks. The East, time and again, quietly digested the West. How does a civilization pull off this trick repeatedly across 5,000 years? The answer, I think, lies not in any single factor, but in a layered identity so deep, so ancient, and so internally coherent that no external force could fully overwrite it. 2 Al's. Older than the story we were told. The Western historical imagination has long centered on two cradles of civilization: Mesopotamia and Egypt. Iran, ancient, vast, and geographically formidable, tends to get a supporting role at best. That framing is historically unfair. Archaeological evidence places urban-type settlements on the Iranian plateau dating back 6 to 7,000 years. Ceramic traditions from the 4th millennium BC are among the oldest on the planet. The ancient state of Elam, centered in what is now southwestern Iran, was powerful enough by the 26th century BC that it effectively dictated terms to the Sumerians. More strikingly, the earliest known international treaty in human history was signed between the Akkadian king Naram Sin and Elam, not as a conquest, but as a diplomatic agreement guaranteeing Elam's sovereignty in exchange for foreign policy alignment. In other words, the Iranian world didn't just participate in the birth of civilization, it participated in the birth of diplomacy itself. That detail deserves more attention than it typically receives. The people we recognize today as Iranians arrived somewhat later, nomadic Indo-Iranian tribes descending onto the plateau from the Central Asian steppes and the Caucasus, somewhere between the 20th and 15th centuries BC. Their language was a relative of Latin and Greek, a distant ancestor of nearly every European tongue spoken today. They called themselves Aryans, meaning noble, and their homeland, Aryanam Vyaheha, the land of the Aryans. The name Iran is simply what that phrase became over millennia of natural linguistic evolution. The weapon no army could counter before the Persians built a single road or minted a single coin, they developed what would prove to be their most enduring strategic asset: a worldview. Zoroastrianism, born on the Iranian plateau long before Christianity or Islam, did something radical for its time. It framed the universe as a moral battlefield. An unending war between Ahura Mazda, the principle of light, truth, and order, and Ahriman, the embodiment of darkness, deception, and destruction. Life was not cyclical, not arbitrary, not merely a reflection of nature's seasons. It was purposeful, directional, and morally charged. What strikes me most about Zoroastrianism is that it went further still. It declared that time itself has a shape, not a circle, but a line. The world had a beginning, it has a present unfolding, and it will have an end. A final reckoning between light and darkness, a purification, a last judgment. This was not a minor theological detail. It was a civilizational operating system. When Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon in the 6th century BC and liberated the Jewish population from captivity, the two cultures entered 2 centuries of close intellectual contact. Jewish thinkers absorbed the Zoroastrian framework of linear time, the end of days, and divine judgment, ideas that later flowed directly into Christianity and Islam. Nietzsche, among others, acknowledged Iran's foundational role in giving the Western mind the very temporal coordinates within which it still thinks. This is perhaps Iran's most invisible but most consequential contribution to world history. We experience time as linear, as progress towards something, in no small part because of ideas that crystallized on the Iranian plateau thousands of years ago. The sector. The Achaemenid blueprint. In 550 BC, a man named Cyrus, half Persian, half Median, unified the Iranian tribes and began constructing what historians now call the Achaemenid Empire, the first true superpower in human history. What made Cyrus extraordinary wasn't just the scale of his conquests, it was his governing philosophy. Where previous empires ruled by terror and erasure, Cyrus ruled by respect. He left temples standing. He allowed conquered peoples to maintain their languages and customs. His famous Cyrus Cylinder is sometimes called the world's first charter of human rights, a debated claim, but one that points to something real. This was a ruler who understood that an empire built on cultural coercion is fundamentally brittle. His successor Darius I extended the empire from Egypt to the Indus Valley, bringing perhaps half the world's population under Persian administration. The infrastructure he built was astonishing for its era: a network of roads, a sophisticated postal system, standardized taxation, and a gold coinage. Darius also divided the empire into 20 satrapies, administrative provinces, a model of decentralized governance that would echo through history. The Greco-Persian Wars, immortalized in Western popular culture through the legend of the 300 Spartans, are typically narrated as a Persian defeat. That framing reflects the perspective of the victors. For the Achaemenid Empire, losing a few coastal Greek cities was a minor inconvenience, not an existential blow. The Persians simply adapted. They began funding Athens against Sparta and Sparta against Athens, allowing Greek civilization to exhaust itself. In 387 BC, the Greeks signed a peace treaty on Persian terms. What the Persian army couldn't take by force, Persian gold effectively purchased. The absorption principle. When Alexander burned Persepolis in 3030 BC, it genuinely seemed like the end. The Achaemenid Empire collapsed. A Greek ruling dynasty, the Seleucids, took the throne. Hellenization was the policy of the day. It didn't work. Alexander himself began wearing Persian robes and adopting Persian court protocol before his death. The Hellenistic state that followed couldn't digest what it had swallowed. By the 3rd century BC, the Parthians, an Indo-Iranian people, had expelled the Greeks, declared themselves successors to the Achaemenids, and were holding off the Roman Empire with mobile cavalry and the infamous Parthian shot, the tactic of appearing to retreat while firing arrows backward at full gallop. For 5 centuries, Rome and Parthia circled each other in an uneasy, bloody stalemate. Then the Sasanian dynasty rose in 224 AD, originating from the original Persian homeland. They rebuilt a fiercely centralized state, elevated Zoroastrianism to official doctrine, and waged near-continuous war with Rome and later Byzantium for control of Mesopotamia and the Caucasus. For 400 years. I find it worth pausing on that number. 400 years of sustained imperial competition with the dominant powers of the Western world. That is not the history of a peripheral civilization. The Arab conquest and the cultural counterattack. By the mid-7th century, centuries of war had drained the Sasanian Empire. When Arab armies swept in under the banner of Islam, Iran fell, quickly and completely. The last Sasanian Shah was murdered. The capital collapsed. Zoroastrianism, the spiritual backbone of Iranian identity for millennia, began to fade under pressure from the new faith. Egypt fell to the Arabs and became Arab. Syria fell and became Arab. Both nations, ancient and proud, were effectively overridden. Iran seemed to be heading toward the same fate. What happened instead is one of history's most elegant reversals. The Arab Caliphate, especially under the Abbasid dynasty, found it could not actually run a complex empire without Persian expertise. Persian bureaucrats administered the state. Persian scholars shaped its intellectual culture. Persian poets defined its literary standards. The Arabic-speaking rulers began governing through Persian frameworks and absorbing Persian aesthetic sensibilities. The Persian language didn't just survive the conquest. It thrived, eventually becoming the dominant literary and administrative language across a vast swath of the Islamic world, from Central Asia to the Indian subcontinent, for centuries after the conquest. This is what I mean by the absorption principle. Iran lost the military confrontation and won the civilizational one. To Genghis Khan's grandchildren built Persian mosques. If the Arab conquest was devastating, the Mongol arrival in 1220 was something closer to an extinction-level event. Genghis Khan's armies didn't just conquer cities, they unmade them. Ancient irrigation systems that had sustained agriculture for thousands of years were destroyed. Entire populations were massacred. It is estimated that Iran lost a significant fraction of its total population during this period. And yet, when Genghis's grandson Hulagu founded his Mongol state on Iranian territory, within a generation his successors had converted to Islam, adopted Persian as the language of government, and were commissioning the construction of Grand Persian mosques with those iconic blue-domed interiors. Tamerlane, who arrived at the end of the 14th century and famously stacked the skulls of his victims into towers, stood in genuine awe of Persian artistic culture and carried Iranian craftsmen back to Samarkand. His descendants, the Timurids, presided over a genuine Persian Renaissance. There is something almost darkly comic about this pattern. The people who came to destroy Persian civilization kept accidentally becoming its patrons. The Safavids and the Shia identity. Out of 300 years of Mongol and Turkic rule, a new unifying figure emerged in 1501, Shah Ismail, founder of the Safavid dynasty. He reunited the country and made a decision that would permanently reshape the cultural landscape of the Islamic world. He declared Shia Islam the official state religion of Iran. This was not merely a theological choice. It was a geopolitical masterstroke. At a stroke, it differentiated Iran permanently from the Sunni Ottoman Empire to its west and from the broader Sunni world. It gave Iran yet another layer of distinct identity, a new edge along which it could resist assimilation. The Safavid state essentially encoded its own cultural uniqueness into its religion. The renaming that was actually a declaration. By the 19th and early 20th centuries, Iran had entered its most difficult modern period. Losses to Russia stripped away the territories of modern Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. Britain and Russia carved the country into spheres of influence, extracting oil and stationing troops. Iran was being treated as a resource, not a civilization. When Reza Shah Pahlavi came to power in 1925, he launched a modernization drive, and in 1935, he did something that had the entire diplomatic world reaching for new stationery. He formally requested that all foreign governments stop calling the country Persia and use its own name, Iran. To Western ears, Persia conjured carpets and fairy tales and romantic exoticism, the imagery of a charming, backward curiosity. Iran, the land of the Aryans, the name the people had always used for themselves, was a statement of self-possession. We are not your romantic projection. We are an ancient nation, and you will address us on our own terms. It's a small act that carries enormous symbolic weight. A civilization that had spent millennia being defined by others, Greeks, Arabs, Mongols, Europeans, was insisting on defining itself. The paradox that still lives today. A strange duality persists in how the world perceives this place. Iran activates associations of geopolitical friction, sanctions regimes, and international tension. Persia, meanwhile, has become almost mythological, associated with sublime poetry, intricate tilework, literary genius, and the grandeur of lost empires. Two names, one land. And a civilization that has always existed in the gap between how it sees itself and how the world insists on seeing it. What strikes me, stepping back from 5,000 years of this story, is that Iran's greatest strategic resource was never its army, its gold, or its geography. Though it had all three in abundance, it was depth. A cultural depth so accumulated, so layered, so internally coherent that no external force ever managed to fully override it. Every conqueror who tried to erase Iran ended up, in some essential way, becoming Iranian. That's not just history. That's a philosophy of survival that most civilizations never figured out. The battle over Iran's identity, between its ancient grandeur and its modern complexity, between how it understands itself and how others project onto it, is still very much alive. And if the past 5,000 years are any guide, it will outlast the latest round of people who think they finally figured out how to define it.